Monsters overran the world, plunging it into despair. Humanity fought to its last breath to protect what they called home. And among those brave souls was the protagonist of this story, Carcelion Levandios, who fought this menace fiercely and unflinchingly. Years passed as he relentlessly threw himself into endless battles, continuously piling up corpses with his soul sword, his heart devoid of any fear. Then one day he had to confront his half-brother Aaron. That bastard was unbelievably stubborn. The battle was fierce and brutal, but in the end, he managed to take down that rotten bastard. He truly finished off that piece of trash. After that bloody battle, Carcelion too collapsed and entered the realm of death. But fate had other plans. His soul drifted in the endless void. There he met a human boy from a planet called Earth. His name was Shin. He was on the verge of death for reasons unknown. And before dying, he only wanted to make a simple request to Carcelion. Carcelion immediately refused, not even bothering to hear what the kid wanted. After all, he just wanted to die in peace. He'd had enough of everything, losing his country to monsters, losing all his loved ones, and finally dying like a dog on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the boy Shin wasn't desperate to live either. All he wished for was for his family to live in peace. It seemed Carcelion finally decided to listen to the kid's plea. The boy's eyes lit up like a child seeing candy in a store. And then he mustered all his courage to voice his wish. He wanted his family to live in peace. And so our hero accepted the offer, taking on the responsibility of protecting the boy's family. Then he woke up on Earth in the body of the teenager Dojin. Now he had a new mission: infiltrate the Namsan Gate, which was classified as C rank. For obvious reasons, only registered heroes were allowed entry. The automatic scanner continuously blared, requesting him to scan his hero ID card. Of course he didn't have such a thing, so he just barged straight ahead through the heavily guarded building and into the gate. Security alarms immediately blared, warning of an intruder. Once inside, he began to roam around trying to find some monsters to beat up to vent his frustration. And then he encountered a hero party, a legitimate team fully licensed and authorized to be in this gate. They assumed he was just a lost civilian and offered to escort him out, especially as they were also preparing to withdraw. Dojin remained silent, exuding a strange aura that even the heroes sensed was off. His attire was too casual, not hero-like at all. Sure, comfortable clothing was more common now, but his was strangely simple. And what was with the bag on his back? From what they could see, he looked like a clueless porter abandoned by his party, but they weren't sure. Finally, Dojin spoke up, acknowledging their suspicions had merit, but also making it clear that he had come alone, not with any party. Hearing this, one of the heroes sighed, seemingly understanding why he was there. He'd seen countless cases of people getting overly excited by flashy hero advertisements, thinking life was a dream, and recklessly entering gates without following the proper procedures, first registering and getting certified as an official hero, then undergoing training and tests. A C-rank gate was no place for a newbie to play around. If he wanted to start a career, he should find an F-rank gate unless he wanted to die a pointless death. After listening to him ramble on and offer unsolicited advice, Dojin coldly replied, "You don't need to listen to anything." The entire hero party was stunned by the kid's ice-cold attitude, especially when they were just trying to help. But their leader spoke up, telling his teammates to calm down. If the kid didn't want help, then let him be. He could fend for himself. The leader was sure the kid would soon learn a harsh lesson about not listening when wise people spoke. They just hoped he'd quickly realize the harsh reality of these gates, which were nothing like the TV shows that glorified heroes as if they were reincarnated saviors. Then the time came. Dojin finally encountered a giant troll glaring at him, ready to swallow him whole. The monster lunged, attacking, but missed. The blow struck the ground. This guy moved so fast, the troll didn't even realize what had happened. Then he clenched his fist and delivered a terrifying punch. It hit so hard it blew the orc's face clean off. It looked just like a scene from One Punch Man or Omni-Man on a rampage. Now that the monster was out of the picture, it was time for the fun part. Looting time, baby. First, he snatched the sword the bastard was holding and used that very sword to dig deep into the monster's body and pull out a sparkling, glowing stone. In reality, it was just a low-grade mana stone so worthless that Dojin wouldn't have even glanced at it in his previous life. But currently he was broke, so he had to pick it up for now. Suddenly, another group of monsters swarmed the area, furious to see their comrade's head had been blown off. Dojin turned and threw the gemstone with terrifying speed so fast it blew the head off one of them. The remaining two idiots charged recklessly as if seeking death. And if they were asking for death, Dojin wasn't hesitant to grant it. And so he once again began to wreak havoc on everything around him. Cut to the hero party still trudging through the monster-infested area. Their minds still lingered on the strange encounter with the young man from before. The orange-haired woman seemed genuinely worried about Dojin, fearing he might already be dead. But their leader reassured them that it was unlikely. If he were just an unregistered individual who barged into the gate agents from the control center, would soon detect him. The agents on duty are all B rank or higher, and this gate is only C rank. So unless the kid foolishly charged headfirst into monsters, there was no way he'd die in here. The bald guy also agreed with that assessment. He was certain that arrogant kid was probably cowering somewhere waiting for rescue. But the reality was completely the opposite. Our protagonist was making those oversized punching bags monsters tremble in fear. One hit was all it took to down his prey. He was so fast, the monsters couldn't even touch him, let alone strike him with their massive swords. Dojin appeared right behind one of those fools and delivered a kick so powerful it crushed its head. When all the bastards were down, he picked up a sword from the corpses and began harvesting the sweet mana stones for himself. A short while later, he was done his bag full and he was ready to leave. Although honestly, he was a bit disappointed with today's hunt. All low-grade heavy stones that weren't worth much. Just then, one of the agents finally spotted him and called for backup. Before Dojin could turn around, the men in suits were blocking his path, their eyes full of suspicion and vigilance. They began by stating they were from the gate control center and requested he present his hero registration card. If he wasn't registered, he would have to accompany them to the center to clarify things. Dojin wasn't sure whether to comply or not. His eyes showed clear hesitation, but he didn't bother to explain, making the atmosphere increasingly tense. That reaction made the man in suit even more tense. His voice became cold and firm. He emphasized that Dojin needed to cooperate and follow proper procedures. Dojin's only response to this insistence was a look of clear annoyance, as if all this drama was just ruining his mood. But despite his irritation, Dojin didn't have the energy to argue. He simply turned his back and walked away as words were having no effect. The men in suits began to threaten to use handcuffs if Dojin didn't cooperate. If necessary, they would use force. An impatient one in the group lost his patience and rashly reached out to grab Dojin's wrist. He loudly warned that if Dojin didn't cooperate, any injuries incurred would be his own responsibility. And if things could be resolved verbally, that would still be the best option for everyone. But it seemed Dojin had lost his patience. He immediately gripped the man's wrist and coldly warned, "Don't get in my way anymore." The chilling threat made the man in the suit shudder. A cold chill ran down his spine. The other two immediately drew their weapons, magic-enhanced batons. These were grade 4 magic batons, powerful enough to subdue an ogre, not some trivial toys. However, to Dojin, those batons weren't nearly enough to truly injure him. He twisted the baton-wielding man's wrist sharply, making him groan like a true weakling. Dojin coldly issued a final ultimatum: if they didn't want to lose what little dignity they had left, they should scram immediately. However, the men in suits were bound by their duty and forced to act. They tried their best to hit Dojin with their magic batons, but not a single blow landed. Dojin retaliated with a crushing blow. That crushing blow struck one of them squarely in the back, making him collapse. Then he turned and landed a punch to another's stomach. Afterward, Dojin's gaze fell upon the man with glasses, the last one standing. This man knew things weren't looking good. His whole body tensed as if he could be taken down at any moment. Suddenly, Dojin blurred, and then vanished from sight, disappearing completely as if into thin air. The man with glasses was truly terrified because he'd seen someone vanish right before his eyes, and then out of nowhere, a surprise punch slammed into his stomach, making him stagger back in pain. It seemed Dojin was getting tired of being chased by agents. He began to seriously consider registering as a hero. The remaining agent quickly reassured him that as long as Dojin wasn't involved in anything illegal or shady, no one would pursue him. Hearing this, Dojin asked about something called a rift. That question stunned the agent, who had no idea how to respond. Quick explanation of this world. Many gates connect to other worlds filled with bizarre monsters. These gates appear scattered throughout the world. The gemstones obtained from monster corpses have become an extremely valuable new energy source. Therefore, the government must control all these portals called gates, and only registered heroes are allowed entry. Uncontrolled gates, or those that cannot be sealed, are called rifts. Back to Dojin, he found it annoying that the men in suits were always following him everywhere. Whenever he entered any gate, they accused him of illegal entry. The agent tried to explain that when an unregistered hero enters a gate without permission, the central system immediately triggers an alarm, and nearby agents on standby are dispatched. When he learned Dojin intended to enter a rift, he warned that unlike gates, rifts weren't so easy to enter. Trespassing into a rift would be met with severe punishment, no warnings or leniency. But Dojin didn't want to hear any of it. He grabbed the poor agent's face and tossed him aside like a bag of trash. Now the agent could only regret not reporting to headquarters sooner. This whole situation was far beyond his capabilities. Before leaving, Dojin glanced at the pathetic man lying on the ground, thinking he was truly just a pitiful weakling. The man seemed to have a broken arm but still managed to shout threats, vowing to catch Dojin and throw him in jail. The scene shifts to the Sona and Digital Complex in Gu-un District. This was a massive building now known as the Hero Complex, where all transactions related to mana stones and items from gates took place. Currently, the place was busier than ever. Dojin was heading towards one of the shops specializing in buying and selling mana stones. As soon as he stepped inside, he was greeted by a brazen young man whose face was glued to his phone, endlessly scrolling through Instagram as if his mind had been numbed by those useless clips. When Dojin said he wanted to sell some mana stones, the cunning shop owner immediately boasted that his shop offered the highest prices in the country. Without saying much, Dojin threw all the low-grade mana stones still stained with monster blood onto the counter. The moment the shop owner saw the blood-soaked stones, he grimaced as if he'd been stabbed in the back, disgust clearly visible on his face. However, he didn't complain and continued with the transaction, even offering Dojin coffee while he waited for them to be processed. A short while later, Dojin leisurely sipped his coffee, while the shop owner carefully wiped every bloodstain off the stones. After finishing, he began to calculate a total of 12 low-grade mana stones, 16 mid-grade, and a few other high-grade and low-grade ones. After deducting a 40% commission, Dojin would receive about 5.5 million won. But he was not at all satisfied with this 40% deduction, feeling it was extremely unfair. He had clearly hunted, killed, and collected them himself, so why did this guy think he deserved nearly half the money? The shop owner smugly boasted that he was being generous, as other shops took 45% or more, then sarcastically told Dojin that if he didn't like it, he could take his stones back. No other place would offer a better price. Of course, Dojin wasn't naive enough to fall for that. He began to gather his mana stones, preparing to leave. Seeing his dirty trick fail, the shop owner hastily grabbed Dojin's hand, stopping him from leaving. He loudly demanded payment for the appraisal fee and the coffee. The appraisal fee was 30,000 gold plus 10,000 gold for the coffee, not to mention the expensive cloth stained with blood that now had to be thrown away. In total, Dojin owed him about 350,000. Dojin bluntly dismissed these ridiculous demands, ignoring the man's clamor. Finally, the shop owner resorted to threats mentioning the C-rank bodyguards he hired for protection. Just then, 3 burly men stepped out from the back, their faces grim, asking, "Who dares cause trouble here?" They declared that if anyone made a scene, they would deal with them immediately. Dojin just calmly glanced at the shop owner, his gaze as sharp as a blade. The shop owner didn't back down either, trying to appear fearless, returning the stare with a fierce look. Only a moment later, the scene shifted to the shop owner's sweaty and trembling face. The one who just moments ago thought he was the center of the universe had reality slap him hard in the face when Dojin took down all 3 bodyguards as if swatting flies without expending any effort. It was clear who the real protagonist was here. Afterward, Dojin approached the counter and casually forced the price down to a 1% commission. Before the shop owner could react, the deal was sealed at 1%, no strings attached. Because when Dojin looked someone straight in the eye, no one dared to argue. Transaction complete. Dojin leisurely left the shop with a thick wad of cash, the fruit of his own blood and sweat. When he got home, both his grandmother and his younger sister were stunned by the amount of cash he brought back. His grandmother even suspected if it was fake money. Dojin quickly made up a story that this was money he had lent to a friend and that friend's business had prospered, so he returned it. His grandmother was half convinced, half doubtful, unsure if he had any close friends that wealthy. He then added another layer to the lie, saying it was a childhood friend. Finally, his grandmother didn't ask any more questions, at least not any major ones. Meanwhile, Dojin's younger sister was extremely proud and happy that her brother had helped the family become well off. Dojin patted his sister's head, reassuring her that from now on, they would live comfortably. The little girl jumped for joy, her eyes shining like stars. Seeing his sister so happy, Dojin realized he was gradually fulfilling a promise. It was the dying wish of the original owner of this body before he passed away. That person only wished for his grandmother and his younger sister Yoon to live safely and happily. He disappeared right after that, not giving Dojin a chance to say anything. And when he woke up, Dojin had become Seo Dojin. Now his sole goal was to ensure this small family lived safely and prosperously. To do that, he had to buy the safest house in Korea, currently priced at a staggering 110 billion won. For Dojin, making money wasn't an issue, as long as he regained his full original strength. This world had many similarities to the old destroyed world he once lived in, only the monster gates and threats here were much weaker. For someone who once bore the title of Sword God, this world was nothing more than a playground, because from the beginning until now he had only used 1/10 of his true power. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. The person outside said they wanted to see Seo Jin. He stood up and decided to open the door. When the door opened, 2 thuggish-looking gangsters were waiting in front of him. These guys had come to collect the debt Dojin was carrying, amounting to 48 million won. The moment Dojin saw them, he knew they were loan sharks. They were the ones the real Seo Dojin, whom Dojin had possessed, had borrowed money from before he died. Initially, he had only borrowed 5 million won to pay for his hospitalized grandmother's treatment. And yet they were now demanding a whopping 48 million won. Interest compounding on interest, the classic cutthroat rates of gangsters. They knew Dojin had recently made a lot of money hunting in gates, so they came to cash in. Because in the loan agreement, everything was clearly documented. But what those bastards received was a punch that felt like it came from the heavens right in the face of the biggest guy among them. The punch was so strong it sent him flying backward, rolling several times on the ground. The other guy stood frozen, mouth agape, eyes wide in disbelief at what he had just seen. At this point, Dojin turned to look at the remaining man with an icy gaze that seemed to pierce his soul. He reminded him that he had already paid back over 9 million won in principal and interest. If calculated properly, it was they who owed him the excess money. And then another punch this time, making the man clutch his face and cry like a child. Du Jin stood tall, his voice low and menacing. "Go tell your boss I'll come find him myself." The scene shifts to a bustling shopping mall crowded with people. Amidst the crowd, a cute image of little Yoon appears smiling brightly in a teddy bear shop, her eyes sparkling. Du Jin had taken his sister shopping today, allowing her to choose anything she liked. Don't forget, this young man wasn't always so warm. It was the memories of the real deceased Do Jin that had reawakened emotions he thought had dried up within him. Now every time he saw Yoon being cared for and smiling brightly, his heart warmed strangely. Even though she was only his half-sister, he still wanted to love her with all his heart. He would make up for everything she lacked, give her all the best things. Finally, Yoon chose a small, cute bunny plushie. She was very modest, afraid that buying something expensive would bother her brother. But Do Jin didn't agree with that humility. He immediately chose a stuffed animal several times larger to give to her. This was her day, and she deserved to enjoy her happiness fully without worrying about money. Afterward, the two siblings sat down to eat delicious food, chatting animatedly as they ate. While they were enjoying their meal, a strange voice called out, "Du Jin's name." It was a middle-aged woman accompanied by a few bodyguards. She looked like a typical pretentious lady, slightly plump, and the moment she opened her mouth, her disdainful tone began attacking Do Jin right from his manner of dress. Then she shifted her target to Yoon, the little girl sitting beside him, not mincing her words. She uttered a sarcastic remark. "Aren't you just like your mother back then, having a child out of wedlock?" That remark was like pouring oil on fire. Du Jin clenched his fists, his eyes glinting with anger. Meanwhile, Yoon still didn't understand who this woman was or why she was speaking so ill of them. The woman then approached the little girl and asked directly, "What's your name?" "My name is Lee Yoon, ma'am," the little girl replied politely. Upon hearing this, the woman suddenly remembered that this was Do Jin's sister, but she still didn't forget to mock the child's simple clothes, calling them frumpy. Not only that, but she also insulted their deceased mother. At this point, Do Jin just wanted to rush in and teach her a lesson, but he still tried to control himself not to be provoked. The woman herself was surprised that Do Jin didn't fly into a rage, something he definitely would have done before. But then, that woman decided to go even further, opening her mouth to ask a child, "Do you know what the word slut means?" That was the last straw. Du Jin shot up his eyes, glaring, his voice as cold as ice. "You are truly an ugly woman. Looking at you, you look like you belong to the orc tribe." The woman was stunned, her eyes wide, her mouth frozen shut, unable to speak. To understand why Do Jin had endured this woman for so long, we must go back to the past. Du Jin was born out of wedlock and lived in poverty from a young age. His mother passed away when he was only 7, and he was sent to live in his biological father's house. His father then remarried, and things started to get worse. When his stepmother gave birth to her own son, Do Jin was completely treated as an outsider. Eventually, he was even kicked out of the house. He had to go live with his grandmother and his half-sister Yoon. Every time he remembered, Do Jin couldn't help but feel sorry for the old Do Jin, who had tried to live well, always smiling despite enduring so much pain. But now things were different. He wanted to change everything. And that woman was his stepmother's daughter, from a previous marriage, his stepsister. That's why he had tolerated her until now. But now it was over. He no longer wanted to be subservient. She was not only mean-spirited and ugly, but also foolish. He continued to crush her spirit by unleashing a barrage of harsh words, as if throwing bombs at this girl's insecurities. He bluntly stated that the only reason she always called others ugly was because she herself was drowning in self-loathing and jealousy. She was just a gold digger obsessed with other people's lives. That was the truth the world should know. As he continued to crush her self-esteem with his sharp words, the entire shopping mall turned their attention to them, as if watching a main performance on stage. That orc woman started to lose control, completely losing her composure due to her anger. But just then, Dojin's stepmother appeared. As soon as she saw her mother, the orc girl immediately approached her with a whiny tone like a child throwing a tantrum. She started complaining that this boy had just used words that made her lose face completely. But her mother only looked at her daughter with a cold gaze, clearly showing her disappointment. She quickly silenced her with just a glance. No joke, folks, Dojin's stepmother is truly a character not to be trifled with. At first I thought that orc woman was the stepmother, but no. The alluring woman turned to Dojin, smiling with fake gentleness, inviting him to come home for a visit. But Dojin wasn't easily fooled. He knew the true face behind her mask. This was the woman who had made him live in hell for 12 long years. The woman continued to evoke memories that Dojin only wanted to bury forever. The past rushed back, putting Dojin into a serious state as if he had just been triggered with PTSD. With a tone colder than your mother's scolding, he looked straight at the woman and uttered the cruel words, "Get lost." Being spoken to like that by someone younger was a direct slap in the face to that woman. She turned, trying to preserve her last shred of dignity, and left. In truth, she hadn't expected him to resist so strongly. Previously, he would just bow his head and endure even when she slapped him without reason. Her insolent daughter trailed behind along with a few bodyguards. These bodyguards were truly like useless scarecrows throughout the whole scene. Now let's return to our protagonist. Clearly, those two had completely ruined his rare moment of peace. So Dojin decided to leave. His reaction to his step-family was intentional. He wanted to emphasize one thing: the weak Seo Dojin, who didn't dare to speak up in the past, was dead. That trashy family should realize it soon. The scene shifts to a Mercedes speeding down the road. Inside the car are the two trashy mother and daughter. The daughter angrily blamed her mother for leaving without making Dojin pay. She continued to curse Dojin, bitter about being humiliated in public. But the mother didn't pay attention to her daughter's words. She turned to her manager and questioned why Dojin was still alive. The bald guy was clueless. According to previous reports, he should have been dead already. The woman roared as if she had gone mad. How could that happen? They had ensured it was handled cleanly. The manager could only bow his head, promising to check again, and this time ensure it was finished definitively. Meanwhile, her daughter didn't understand what was happening. Hearing talk of murder, she began to panic. Finally, the mother turned to her daughter and asked a surprising question. "Do you have feelings for that brat?" The question made the piglet blush and stammer, not knowing how to answer. In truth, she was just worried that if Dojin really died, her grandfather or father would find out and there would be big trouble. But the mother didn't want to hear her reasons. She grabbed her daughter's mouth tightly as if wanting to stifle her protests. She gritted her teeth, saying her daughter was not allowed to get involved in her affairs. That woman had decided Dojin had to die. No second chances. Especially after he dared to stand up and humiliate her in front of so many people. Dealing with him was the best revenge she could think of. A decade ago, the world fell into chaos when rifts appeared. They were bizarre dimensions that spawned terrifying monsters. They poured through a dimensional gate, killing indiscriminately. Cities were destroyed, engulfed in flames. But as darkness loomed, light also emerged. Mighty warriors' heroes stood up. They were the first to discover monastones from monster corpses. Back to the present. Dojin is moving somewhere. In his mind are thoughts about monastones, the thing that completely changed how the world uses energy. Because of their value, nations began to fight over rift gates to exploit resources. Now the entire world's industry depends on rifts and heroes. Becoming a hero is the only way to secure a stable high income. Dojin arrives at the headquarters of Yongdang HCS Capital. The name sounds complicated, but the reason he came here will soon be clear. He entered the building, and from the first glance, the people inside looked like nothing more than cheap thugs trying to use their appearance to intimidate others. But Dojin remained calm, unfazed by the tense atmosphere. The boss stubbed out his cigarette. His voice, full of sarcasm, pointed at Seojin and emphasized his audacity. Not only did he dare to beat up his underlings, but he also dared to calmly walk right up to their door. That only proved one thing: Seo Dojin truly didn't care about anyone anymore. But Dojin calmly said that the one truly at a loss here was him. A statement that made the boss almost choke on his cigarette smoke. He frowned, his voice low and threatening. "What the hell did you just say?" "Do." Jin adjusted his glasses and slowly replied, his voice low and cold as steel. "I came here to receive compensation. Because all this time it was the clowns of this organization who had caused him countless losses, mental, physical, and material." At this moment, the boss realized something important, an undeniable change. The boy from before was no longer a gentle, weak person. The person in front of him now was the one who had crushed his underlings like trash. All signs pointed to a single hypothesis: Seo Dojin had definitely undergone an unparalleled awakening in that hellish gate. Even knowing this, he still pretended to be superior, mocking Dojin's newfound confidence. He criticized that this very arrogance would lead him to ruin, that he was deluding himself about his own strength. To reinforce that argument, he waved his hand, and a few burly thugs stepped forward, surrounding Dojin. They were muscular, their eyes fierce, but to a sword god who had walked through hell, they were nothing more than insects. The boss continued to spew his trashy reasoning. He said, "Even an awakened person is just trash on the battlefield, nothing more, nothing less." The funniest part was that he still thought Seo Jin was just a D-rank hero, so weak that his organization could crush him at any moment. Meanwhile, Dojin just sat calmly, legs crossed on the sofa with 5 men staring him down, yet his expression remained unchanged. He just coldly commanded, "Sit down." The word stunned the boss. He couldn't believe his ears. Dojin maintained his cold, stern expression, saying, "I'm not finished talking yet." One of the men lost his patience, his blood boiling, and stepped forward to challenge Dojin. He smirked faintly and slowly took off his glasses, further confusing his opponent. And then he unleashed a terrifying Mike Tyson-style punch. Ballistic Universal Machine, W Rocket Punch, 9000. The man flew backward as if hit by a truck. The rest were stunned, but the nightmare wasn't over. Dojin proceeded to take down another one with just a spinning kick. While teaching them a lesson, he calmly spoke about the dark dealings the boss was hiding under the guise of a financial loan company. Dojin landed a punch on an orange-haired man while simultaneously exposing their forgery of identification documents. After landing the punch, he turned to the boss and stated his purpose directly. "I need a legitimate hero identity to register and earn money." The last guy tried a sneak attack, but Dojin dodged the blow and returned it threefold. And so the whole gang was knocked out, lulled to sleep by Dojin's special lullaby, 100% success rate. After cleaning up, Dojin sternly continued, "You need a perfect identity, no flaws in the record, so there won't be any trouble later." The boss was still in shock. In just a few seconds, the tables had completely turned. Dojin reminded him, "You have exactly 1 day." A few of the underlings didn't dare to interfere. This was commendable because in most stories they would rush in as if they could defeat a god, even if they were just level 1 rookies. The boss began to tremble, looking at Dojin with bewildered eyes. What on earth was his power level? Based on what he had witnessed, he guessed at least B class. He was so lost in his chaotic thoughts that Dojin had to remind him to get on with it. He could only nod repeatedly. Dojin approached and placed a hand on his shoulder gently, but his eyes were filled with killing intent. He wanted to know if Hong Hee-yeon, his stepmother, had ordered him to deal with him. This had actually been revealed earlier through her conversation with her daughter and assistant. The boss flustered, stammered, and didn't answer, until Dojin's hand tightened, making him groan in pain. The rest of the underlings could only watch their faces pale. And honestly, these guys really needed to find a new barber. Finally, the boss broke down. He confessed the wicked woman's plan. She wanted to drain Dojin, financially push him into debt, and despair, forcing him to commit suicide to free himself. A truly cruel plan. Even for a hated child, no one should do that. Hearing that, Dojin tightened his grip one last time, then let go. When he saw the man crying and begging, he quietly asked, "Is that also why you guys locked me in the gate?" The boss hastily denied it, playing the role of an innocent party completely unrelated to that incident. He even said that if Dojin died in the gate, he wouldn't get a single penny. That was a reasonable motive for him not to act. This explanation made Dojin ponder. He muttered the name Kang Chun-woo, the one who had led him into the gate. Dojin demanded all information about that person deadline tomorrow. He left as politely as he had entered, but the room was completely different. No arrogance or defiance remained, only fear. After that conversation, Dojin fell into a contemplative state again. Deep down, Seo Dojin had only one desire: to protect his beloved sister and grandmother through every layer of pain. That further showed how long he had lived in helplessness and despair. But now the sword god was ready to fix this entire rotten order. The next day, he was officially registered as a hero and unsurprisingly received a B rank, unlike other stories where one has to start from E rank for added coolness. He swiped his card into the scanner. The system confirmed his identity, proving the card was completely valid. However, the machine warned that the mission Dojin was about to undertake had a danger level exceeding his current rank. This annoyed him. Perhaps he should have forced that guy to upgrade his rank earlier to avoid these petty troubles. Despite the system constantly warning him not to enter a gate exceeding his permitted level, Dojin didn't care in the slightest. He just walked in, defying everything. Briefly about the Nightshade Island gate, it was actually just a B-rank gate, but that didn't mean a B-rank hunter could survive entering it. Typically, heroes are recommended to be one rank higher than the gate's rank to ensure safety during missions. However, the scale of this dungeon was rated D, meaning it was spread out and would be very difficult to solo. But the advantage was its tunnel-like structure, which would somewhat lessen the stress of solo hunting. However, due to the gate's scale, the official advice was to have an A-rank hero handle this mission. But the words danger and risk did not exist in Dojin's dictionary. For him, the worst that could happen was just having to face an entire horde of monsters crammed into a narrow tunnel with no room to maneuver. Dojin smiled as he faced his first enemy. It was a giant serpent surrounded by a chaotic purple aura. For most heroes, this sight would be enough to inspire terror, but for Dojin, it was a lucky sign. He began to prepare his gloves, ready for battle. Oh, and one more thing. This serpent wasn't alone. It had a whole group of friends with it, and their tongues reminded me of scenes from alien monster movies. They charged in, attacking with everything they had, but it was completely futile because our Dojin is a true killing machine. Such a killing machine that he collected mana stones as if the monsters had never even existed. The Black Venom Assassins were a monster species famous for their hyperactive, paralyzing toxin. Just a small contact was enough to make anyone collapse. Aware of this, Dojin went all out, launching himself like a bullet and delivering a full power punch. In a flash, he slashed all over the monster's body, blood splattering until its body was cut in half. When the monster was defeated, Dojin noticed his equipment. The gloves he had bought for 300,000 won were doing their job, preventing the poison from seeping in. A worthy investment. Back to the hunt. Dojin turned his gaze towards 4 other disgusting multi-legged snakes and began to blow their heads off. With his terrifying speed, he pierced straight through their skulls, blood splattering everywhere. When the snakes were sent to the afterlife, Dojin stood there diligently searching for mana stones by tearing through the monster's flesh. But disappointingly, there were none. This wasn't too surprising, because according to the laws of his old world, monsters like these only had a 3% chance of dropping mana stones. This meant he'd have to defeat hundreds of them to hope for a good haul. Continuing onward, Dojin discovered a special creature which I'll temporarily call Mr. Skull Fog. You might think this is the final boss, but Dojin had other ideas. He asked the giant serpent if it was the boss, as if it would politely answer like an old friend. Regardless, Dojin still saw this as a good sign because now he didn't have to worry about getting lost. He turned and immediately lunged into an attack, wanting to end the battle quickly so he could go home. But surprisingly, despite delivering a powerful punch, it didn't harm the monster at all. It merely left something like a tattoo on its head. While suspended in midair and unable to dodge, the monster swung its tail, swatting Dojin backward into a cliff wall. Dojin, after that terrifying impact, probably realized some truth about the boss's power. This time, the monster bared its venomous fangs and hissed like a hungry girlfriend. It lunged to bite him, but luckily Dojin managed to dodge in time. Taking advantage of the momentum from the dodge, he immediately sprang up to counterattack. A tremendously powerful punch landed on the monster's body, creating more cracks on its hard shell. From this second attack, Dojin learned something important. This boss's shell was much harder than the Black Venom assassins from before. It was a much greater challenge. The shell was too tough for him to penetrate with a single blow. The tables had turned, forcing him to consider changing his strategy. In his original state, the sword god would have easily crushed this monster in an instant. Then something caught his eye. The sword of a warrior who had perished in battle with the boss. And now you'll understand why he's called the sword god, not the fist god. Although the sword was worn out from battle, Dojin still picked it up. He believed that a sword is only strong in the hands of a worthy wielder. With that belief and the sword in hand, he advanced towards the giant serpent. The creature tensed and lunged to attack again with terrifying speed. Dojin responded by soaring into the air. He hovered in the sky, striking a cool pose, and proudly declared that the monster should feel honored to be annihilated by him using his full power with a sword. Even though this sword looked like scrap metal, this guy was truly insane. With just a few slashes, he unleashed countless flashing sword strikes, shredding the serpent's body until no part of it remained intact. The serious battle ended humorously as the serpent died and collapsed behind him while Dojin's sword disintegrated into dust. Luckily, he had finished off the monster while it was still struggling to cling to life. With the boss defeated, Dojin had a clever idea that few protagonists think of. He plucked out one of the serpent's fangs, believing that if properly forged, it would become excellent material for a dagger. He considered it a reward for his journey. And then he left the gate. When he stepped out, the sky was already full of stars. He hadn't expected to be in the B-rank gate for so long. But with what he had just experienced, he was even more determined to restore his own strength to its peak, while also silently glad that his old friends hadn't witnessed his current weakened state. How embarrassing. After the hunt, he went to the appraisal office to sell the mana stones he had collected. Before him, another hero was also bringing in a pile of mana stones for trade. But the stingy employee treated that person like trash and immediately announced that the commission rate would be 40%. Even that naive hero felt something was off. He spoke up frankly, questioning it and stating he was just an ordinary person. The employee then pulled the same old trick as with Dojin, explaining that the 40% rate was the lowest compared to other appraisal services. The gate center charged 5%, but that didn't include tax. From his perspective, this was a good deal for heroes because they could still make a decent amount of money from it. Finally, the hero was paid, and he didn't complain further except to worryingly ask about the employee's bruised face. It was funny how the guy still repeated the old script, even though his face was beaten alternativas. He acted convincingly, saying that some psycho had defeated the guards and left his face like that. Hearing this, the hero thought about it and concluded that it was the employee's fault for hiring low-level guards for a C rank post. Because in this world, rank isn't everything. Actual skill is the important factor. Rank is just an artificial system updated periodically to maintain stability. He even pointed out the difference between those who just sit and guard a shop counter and real heroes risking their lives on the battlefield. Even though they were having a serious conversation, the employee just wanted him to shut up and leave as soon as possible. Finally, the hero left, but still said he would help the guy if he needed it. Just then, Do-jin walked in, brushing past him without a glance. His ice-cold gaze froze the atmosphere. Immediately, the employee recognized Do-jin and panicked, pointing and shouting that he was the psycho who had caused all the chaos, yelling that it was Do-jin who had beaten him up like this. Turning back, the hero felt rather impressed, his eyes assessing Do-jin's lean and tall physique. But Do-jin causing a disturbance here made him suspicious, wondering if he was abusing his power to bully civilians. Even though he only knew one side of the story, it still made this character realistic and interesting. The employee, meanwhile, was gleefully watching, knowing that this person was a veteran hero who had been active for 7 years and had many connections. If Do-jin did anything to him, he could use those connections to get Do-jin into trouble, but Do-jin didn't care, just turned back and coldly told the old man to get out of his sight. This made the other person feel provoked, as if he really was a bastard. Do-jin casually asked back if he intended to take revenge. Hearing this, the hero seemed annoyed, but with his experience he knew that fighting another hero was extremely foolish because it almost always led to a fatal outcome. The mortality rate was even higher than when fighting monsters. Remembering that, he decided to cool down and turn to leave, leaving the employee speechless. Do-jin turned to the cunning appraiser and asked if there was a problem. Before he could open his mouth, Do-jin threw the bag full of magic stones onto the counter, each one sparkling. All high-grade mana stones that would startle anyone who saw them. From the employee's perspective, he began to wonder who this guy really was. He started calculating the value of the stones, and the total came to 150 million, a seemingly large number, but to Do-jin it was too little for a day of monster hunting. When he asked for the money, the employee reminded him that they still had to deduct the commission making. Do-jin glared at him coldly, but then he remembered that their agreement was only a 1% deduction. Do-jin calmed down and told him to quickly pay the rest. Inside the humorous appraiser's mind, a storm of indignation was brewing. He really wanted to punch this guy for his outrageous attitude and unbelievable insolence. But it all remained in his imagination. In real life, he could do nothing but grit his teeth and endure. At this point, he said as an excuse, "Such a large sum requires approval from a superior." Without wasting another second, Do-jin slammed the table and growled his order. "Then call your superior immediately. I want approval right now." Trembling under the pressure, the employee hurriedly picked up the phone, furtively whispering to his boss over the internal line, trying to explain the situation smoothly. But before things could progress, Do-jin snatched the phone. "Get out of the way. Let me talk to him." And he yelled into the phone, "I don't have all day. Pay up immediately." The boss on the other end of the line didn't seem to want any trouble either. He reluctantly agreed, but asked to return the phone to his employee. Do-jin gave a knowing smile, pretending to obediently hand the phone back. But instead of handing it over, he threw the device straight at the wall, shattering it into pieces. Perhaps it was accidental, or perhaps entirely intentional. The employee looked at the shattered phone, his whole body trembling. Meanwhile, Do-jin didn't care at all, just coldly ordered, "Now go prepare the money. Everything's settled." And so, countless bags of cash were quickly packed ready for this massive transaction. In the end, the employee was left utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally. You might feel sorry for him, but remember, he was the one who routinely scammed heroes out of more than half their earnings after they risked their lives. A true scumbag. 10 minutes later, his boss was at the shop, his face furious because he couldn't be reached. The funny thing was, the moment the employee saw his boss, he immediately threw in the towel. "I'm submitting my resignation effective immediately." The boss looked around and found the shattered phone stuck to the wall. Just by looking, he could guess part of what had happened. Taking out his phone, he quickly called a familiar name. "Gu Eon, get over here now. We need to deal with an out-of-control hero." Gu Aeon appeared a young woman striking with her vibrant pinkish-purple hair as gorgeous as a brilliant sunset. People around cheered when they recognized her. It was Heo Gu Aeon, a celebrity-like figure admired by thousands, and it must be said the outfit she was wearing was truly top-notch. She entered the shop with a confident demeanor, every step drawing all eyes. With her mere presence, Gu Aeon made the entire room fall silent. She smiled and greeted the receptionist with surprising politeness. "Hello, I'm here at my uncle's request." And the reason everyone was abuzz was because she was one of the 4 strongest S-rank heroes in the country. It was rumored that she was the boss's niece. And surprisingly, Gu Aeon herself confirmed, "Yes, I'm here at my uncle's request. I heard there was a hero who was a bit overzealous." Her curiosity piqued. The stylish hero sat down, preparing to listen to the whole story. The next scene shifts to our protagonist, his toned physique and rippling muscles like a sculpture. He was meditating in the midday sun, sweat dripping from his muscular body. Even though he had hunted monsters all day, the rewards he reaped were insignificant. He began to worry about his future. For now, his biggest goal was to reach a level where he could solo S-rank gates. That meant restoring his full original power. You heard that right. It was time to enter intense training. But Dojin's biggest challenge in this world was the extremely low mana density. No matter how hard he tried at his current absorption rate, it would take at least 3 years to get close to his old power if everything went smoothly. Another option was to invest in stronger equipment. But unfortunately, even the worst items cost hundreds of millions, a complete waste. Suddenly, a cold chill ran down his spine. He sensed something very dangerous approaching. His gaze shifted to Yunyang and his eyes hardened instantly. He rushed over and scooped her up with lightning speed. "Everyone get inside," Du Jin shouted. Once inside, he slammed the door shut. His grandmother panicked, peppered him with questions. "What's wrong, grandchild?" The ground shook violently, the whole house threatening to collapse. His grandmother trembled. "Heavens, is it an earthquake?" Yunyang burst into tears in panic, clinging tightly to his hand. But only he understood this wasn't an ordinary earthquake. It was a sharp, violent energy flooding the space. A spatial rift, a gate, had appeared right above their roof. Without time to think, he growled, "Everyone stay inside, don't go out." With extreme speed, he dashed straight towards the rift, and the last sound he heard before stepping in was the desperate cries of his grandmother and sister calling his name. The scene shifts to the Hero Soul Association headquarters. A warning signal blared. A spatial gate had unexpectedly appeared in the sky over the Ma district. This was the first gate opening after 63 days of peace. Knowing that the White Lion squad was the closest team, the manager immediately ordered them to be contacted and nearby heroes mobilized for rescue. But when he looked closely at the exact coordinates of the gate, his eyes darkened. Oh my God, this gate appeared right on the roof of a residential house. This was an incredibly difficult situation even for experienced individuals, because if a civilian accidentally stepped into the rift, they would almost certainly lose their life. Not to mention the rift would immediately close, preventing anyone else from entering. And if the person inside died 10 days later, a fierce wave of monsters would erupt, spreading throughout the area. That would cause chaos, destroy everything, plunge the surrounding land into disaster, and the safety of Seoul would be completely threatened. The manager was extremely curious about the person who had entered the rift. They quickly confirmed that it was Seo Do-jin who had acted the resident of that house. According to his grandmother, Do-jin had decided to enter the rift solely to protect his family. With this information, they determined he was not a professional hero. This made the situation even more complicated because an ordinary person had almost no chance of returning from a rift. All the staff felt hopeless and helpless because they could do nothing more for the current situation. In the next scene, we see Do-jin's hot-tempered stepmother raging furiously upon hearing about his awakening. She couldn't believe her ears. Her assistant reported that although Do-jin hadn't officially registered with the Hero Association, it was confirmed that he was indeed the one who had awakened during the recent gate opening. This infuriated her because Kang Chun-woo had clearly been tasked with finishing off Do-jin, but in the end he had made the target even stronger. In a fit of rage, she slammed her hand on the table, screaming why they couldn't finish the job themselves and even got paid for a failed mission. She roared at Manager Lee and immediately sent a threatening message to Kang Chun-woo, stating that if he didn't personally kill Do-jin, he would have to compensate 10 times the amount he had received. But what surprised her even more was that her assistant revealed new information. They had just discovered a new rift appearing right on the roof of Do-jin's house. It was confirmed that Do-jin had entered it, and that meant he wouldn't be able to survive and return. Hong Hee-yeon was openly delighted to hear the news and satisfied with the possibility of Do-jin dying inside the rift. For the first time, she calmed down, appearing strangely composed. Then she told her assistant to continue monitoring the situation until more information was available. As for our boy, he had just set foot in the space inside the rift. It was a forest, surprisingly the very forest where he had spent peaceful days as a child. Patiswa Forest was recreated exactly as in his memory down to the smallest detail. Even the dense mana felt familiar just like before. Silently walking on the old path, Do-jin smiled when he saw the majestic world tree appear before him. The world tree. The source of the purest mana stood with a divine beauty, the most sacred structure and the pillar of balance for the entire world. When the old world collapsed, everything began from the moment the world tree was burned, causing the mana flow to be forever distorted. However, in this dimension within the rift, the tree was still intact, as if time had never touched it. Although the reason was unclear, he knew one thing for sure: he had a chance to regain his lost mana. Meditating under that wonderful mana flow, Do-jin felt his power becoming clearer and clearer. He meditated for over 3 days, forgetting to eat, drink, or even his bodily needs. A full 10 days passed. The only thing he focused on was regulating his breath in harmony with nature. But on the 10th night, trouble found him and shattered his tranquility. Strange creatures with bizarre shapes. They were called Bina. They appeared with the purpose of burning the world tree, repeating the tragedy of the past. But this time, Do-jin wouldn't let that happen. The frenzied creatures charged, attacking him. Meanwhile, Do-jin silently regretted not having a water element sword, a weapon that could have made things much easier. The flaming monsters roared and lunged towards him, but by now Do-jin had fully recovered, and with mana surging through his body, he no longer needed a weapon, because he himself had become the weapon, and those hands carrying the power for all to reach out were ready to confront the power radiating from the pure mana flow. He knocked down one monster with a single touch. The second one died, stunned by the terrifying power it had just witnessed. Now let's explain what just happened. The attack he just launched is called mana release. Not exactly telekinesis, but a kind of energy burst in the form of a destructive blow. It had been a long time since he had used this ability in such a way, because all this time the mana in his body had been at an extremely low level. However, the Bull Kinga creatures were not yet willing to stop. They immediately counterattacked by firing concentrated energy blasts from their mouths. Vibrating laser beams glowing like pulses shot straight towards our teenager. But this time he looked calmer than ever. His face was as still as a lake's surface. The tremendous amount of mana surrounding his body was enough to block any damage that could be caused by that attack. With each step he took closer to the monsters, his entire body blazed as if fueled by fire from his soul. He whispered to himself that he had finally protected the world tree from danger, and now he wanted to relax a bit, enjoy the fruits of years of hard training. Those ugly monsters once again tried to fire energy to counterattack, but the teenager, quick as lightning, immediately grabbed 2 of them. With absolute strength, he forced their mouths shut, locking them so they couldn't release their energy. Because of this, the energy in their mouths couldn't escape and exploded violently inside. In an instant, their heads exploded, leaving behind headless, charred corpses. The giant corpses slowly shriveled, as if consumed by the power of sacred fire. On the scorched earth, 2 rare mana stones rolled out from their bodies. However, those were only 2 of the many monsters he had to destroy. Du-Jin smiled refreshingly, his heart racing as he felt the new power called the Eternal Flame. With a satisfied smile, he swung his weapon as if dancing in a sea of blood, slashing through the horde of monsters and collecting countless mana stones. The one-sided slaughter continued until all the monsters were completely wiped out by him. This time, Do-Jin had truly hit the jackpot. Besides the countless mana stones that dropped, he also found a small coin or perhaps a seed glowing with a sparkling golden light. That was the special item called the Eternal Flame. When he picked it up, he felt a warm energy spreading in his palm. With this item, he had regained control over another part of the power he had once lost. He crushed the chip, causing the mystical flame within it to erupt, spreading throughout his body. The way he playfully toyed with the Eternal Flame as if playing immediately reminded one of Sukuna from Jujutsu Kaisen. Under normal conditions, the most logical strategy would be to continue absorbing mana from the World Tree. However, his current body had reached its physical limit for mana absorption, so the second option was to absorb this flame. Upon absorption, his body immediately transformed completely. Mana converted into the fire element, an intense torrent of fire surging through every cell. The intense fire energy radiating from him caused the ground beneath his feet to crack from the heat. In his previous life, he hadn't felt the need to absorb this thing, not even bothering to care about the Eternal Flame. But now, absorbing the flame was mandatory if he wanted to reach the Supreme Realm. Each full absorption of such a flame took at least 10 minutes to complete. Fortunately, he had collected quite a few, so the goal was to absorb as many as possible. The appearance of the rift quickly attracted public and media attention. A swarm of reporters and journalists surrounded his house, while agents and association staff strictly secured the area. Bang Seong-ho was furious that someone had dared to enter the rift without permission. Looking closely, he looked like a copy of Yu Jin-ho from Solo Leveling, but with neater hair. There was also Kim Hyun-woo, another protagonist with blue hair, who showed sympathy for Do-Jin's actions in wanting to save his sister. However, Seong-ho didn't believe that reason-thinking Do-Jin was just a greedy person who recklessly entered the rift without considering the consequences. According to Seong-ho, if Do-Jin died in a normal way, it would be fine, but if he died in the rift, that place would become an explosion point for monsters to pour out, and that would be the real disaster. Hyun-woo asked for Ji-Yu Eon's opinion, the head of the association, and the answer was to proceed according to the established procedure. Hyun-woo continued to question the phenomenon of rifts appearing densely everywhere, like in the US, China, Switzerland, Turkey, and even the UK. That was why Ji-Yu Eon was having difficulty controlling the numerous rifts worldwide. However, some countries had managed to control the situation very easily, making the situation in Korea even more pressing. The people here were outraged because due to one person, the entire country could face disaster. Seong-ho was so mad he wanted to rush in and beat that person up and pray to God that the rift would spit him out. Speaking of the giant purple gate, 28 days had passed since it first appeared. At the same time, that was also the number of days Do-Jin had been in that rift, causing the Hero Association to fear and classify this threat at level 1. Do-Jin's true identity had not yet been announced to protect his privacy, currently only known by the designation Ordinary Person S. While most of the world still didn't know who he was, the Loan Shark boss had quickly pieced together the information and realized the truth. Even his close assistant confirmed the report to clarify information about his involvement. Kim Yang-gu currently served as the right-hand man to Chairman Hwang Jang-soo. Jang-soo was curious and wanted to know Do-Jin's chances of survival. Will he come back intact? Yes, I know that sounds a bit familiar, like a ritual on a One Piece channel, but it's real. But back to the point, the assistant believed that an ordinary person had less than a 1% chance of surviving in such circumstances. But calling Do-Jin an ordinary person made Jang-soo couldn't help but burst into delighted laughter. That very ordinary person had sent his subordinates to the hospital needing weeks of bandaging. From the world's perspective, they had severely underestimated the true capabilities of a civilian who dared to step into a rift. Now Jiang-Su also began to wonder about the survival rate of an awakened individual if placed in a similar situation. And to answer that, his assistant had an opinion. The assistant believed that the key factor depended on the awakened hero's true level. It was impossible to make an accurate judgment without complete information. Even within the Loan Shark Organization, SOB, likely referring back to HCS Capital as Jiang-Su's org, they admitted that combat power and survival ability were two completely different things. When inside a rift, everything becomes much more complex. But one thing was certain: that bastard hadn't changed at all. Jiang-Su wanted to protect Dojin's family, but not for any noble reason. He was truly a piece of trash, intending to sell the organs of Dojin's relatives if he didn't return. And even if Dojin survived, he would still dump the entire debt onto him. He was the very embodiment of a blood-sucking leech. The scene shifts to the majestic image of the World Tree. Here Dojin was entering a period of frenzied training. His body was now full of fire mana. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he continued to train by absorbing hundreds of firestones. With the enormous amount of fire mana currently available, Dojin could freely use and control it as he wished. His fire resistance also increased as a natural consequence. Comparing his current self to his past self, Dojin believed that at least in terms of the fire attribute, he had progressed further and was gradually mastering it. He embraced the World Tree in an emotional moment, because the tree had always appeared to help him whenever he needed it, both in the past and the present. Dojin felt immensely grateful for everything the tree had done for him. As for the collected mana stones, he skillfully wove vines into a small pouch to hold them. After carefully collecting and storing those stones, Dojin understood that he might never see that divine tree again. But deep down he still hoped that someday their paths would cross, and if the divine tree was in danger, he would definitely be ready to protect it with his life. I don't know about you, but I was truly moved by that gentle scene. That night, Dojin finally stepped out of the rift completely intact. Luckily, he didn't sense anyone nearby. Perhaps most people assumed he had died inside and were waiting for a wave of monsters to pour out at any moment. However, he detected the presence of a strong individual nearby. Without hesitation, Dojin immediately rushed to track down the source. Soon after, he encountered two agents, one looking extremely annoyed, the other calm. These were Kim Hyun-woo and Bang Seong-ho, the two who had appeared before. Just by looking at their uniforms, Dojin immediately understood that they belonged to the association, and that meant if he were caught, things would be very troublesome. To handle the situation, Dojin conjured a fireball and powerfully launched it into the air with a forceful throw. The attack soared over the building and exploded with a loud bang, shaking the entire area. As soon as they heard the sound of the explosion, both Hyun-woo and Seong-ho immediately went on high alert. Realizing it was a fire, they quickly tracked down the source of the flames. When they arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. The connection between the rift and their world had completely disappeared. Meanwhile, Dojin quietly left for his next destination without any obstacles. The next morning, news spread everywhere about the status of the rift that had existed for a month in the Mapo area. According to the announcement, the rift disappeared 29 days after Dojin entered. This proved that the Hero Association's fear of a monster wave was completely wrong. Currently, they had no clues about the sudden disappearance of the rift and were conducting an investigation. They also faced difficulty in dealing with the cause of the fire that had occurred near the time the rift disappeared at a landfill. This led most people to believe that Seo-jin had died and that everything that happened was just the consequence of his own reckless actions. No one knew he was hiding among the crowd, silently observing the conflicting opinions from the public. Some people felt sympathy for the young man who had lost his life. But for our protagonist, The disappearance of the rift was a sad and painful piece of news, because now he couldn't interact with the World Tree anymore. Even though he could no longer protect the World Tree, there was still one thing in this life that he could protect. And that's why we returned to the headquarters of HCS Capital. Inside the building, those fools were gleefully celebrating Dojin's death. They were confident that they could easily eliminate Dojin's grandmother and sister afterward because Jong-soo was well known as someone who always sought to strangle others to death. One scumbag even brazenly suggested letting the younger sister grow up a bit more to use her for other purposes. While talking excitedly without controlling his words, a familiar voice echoed, cutting through the atmosphere and demanding to see the head of the company. The scene stops there and shifts to an image of Jang-soo walking and humming along with his mood. He was satisfied thinking that Dojin had been truly eliminated from the game forever. His assistant reviewed the day's schedule. Most of the day was quite free, only a lunch meeting with another CEO. Hearing this, he was delighted as he could party all he wanted tonight at a nightclub managed by Madam Kang, typical of his meaningless fun. But everything changed the moment he entered the building and started climbing the stairs. Before him was the sight of his underlings being thrown around like toys, blood splattered everywhere. And the one who caused this scene was none other than the person he thought was dead. He grabbed him, slammed him to the ground, and ordered the filthy Jong-soo to crawl back to him. He coldly made him crawl like a real dog. The command made the head of the company tremble with fear, his breathing becoming rapid. He stepped forward like a true leader, sitting down in the chair that belonged to Jong-soo, completely taking control. Once again, he repeated the command to Jong-soo, who was stunned, unable to process the humiliation. With no way out, he began to crawl like a real dog. Dojin cruelly ordered, "Next, bark. You're only fit to be an animal." The command was clear and cold, making Jong-soo groan in humiliation. It took him a few seconds to make barking sounds, but Dojin was still not satisfied. He made him bark repeatedly for everyone to hear. Yes, he was forced to bark over and over again under the scornful and disgusted eyes of others. The one who used to sit at the highest position was now dragged down to a level lower than human, just like the way he used to treat others. Dojin coldly pointed out that bastards like Jong-soo only pretended to be loyal and would betray you the moment they had a chance. Stating his name clearly, Dojin flatly declared that he had met countless such despicable people in his life. In despair, Jong-soo knelt begging for his life and promised to be loyal like a dog if he was spared. But Dojin was too tired of cheap pleas. He responded with a punch that felt like it came from the heavens. Just that one hit was enough to make Jong-soo lose his balance and cough up blood right there. His assistant just stood watching the whole thing, not daring to intervene. Until his name was called out. Dojin called him the company's new leader, advised him to stay away from someone like Jong-soo if he didn't want to be betrayed, and then coldly ordered him to kill Jong-soo, giving him full discretion to handle it. But that task was too heavy for someone who only knew how to bow and obey. He panicked, refused, and apologized, explaining that Jong-soo had many powerful connections, so if Dojin took over, there would be a lot of trouble. On behalf of Jong-soo, he begged Dojin to spare his life just one last time. But Dojin didn't want to waste words. He suggested wrapping his body in a drum and throwing it into the deep sea just like they usually did. Because it was clear his subordinates wouldn't obey, he would have to use another method. Dojin threatened all of them that if they didn't listen to him, he would throw them all into a monster gate for food. Hearing that, Jong-soo completely collapsed. He couldn't bear it anymore and just begged through tears, promising to forever obey Dojin. At this moment, our hero also hesitated a bit. Although he could kill Jong-soo right here and end all the problems, he realized he had changed in this life. Dojin himself admitted that he had become softer compared to the cruel person he used to be. Therefore, this time he chose to forgive, extending his hand to give him one last chance. I'm sure from now on Jong-soo will become a devout believer, praying day and night never to anger Dojin again. He shook hands with Dojin, swearing to serve unconditionally from now on. But then, something was abnormal. Why was his hand blazing as if scorched by fire? Yes, Even though Do-jin had become softer, the brutality was still there. Looking him straight in the eye, Do-jin reminded him that this was his true last chance. Do-jin then decisively tore off the man's arm cleanly without the slightest hesitation. That arm was burned to the point where only a pile of charred, mangled flesh remained. When the meeting ended, he coldly turned and walked away, ignoring the pained screams of the president. Nevertheless, Do-jin still left a final warning. If anyone dared to touch his family again, he himself would personally send every single one of them down to hell.